Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karlee Liddy, and I am one of the two Repass Rogers Salmon Restoration Policy Fellows for the 2023 cohort. And today we will explore water management strategies which consider listed species that exist in groundwater-dependent ecosystems throughout California. And here, listed species refers to plants and animals that are either listed as threatened or endangered under the Endangered Species Act. To provide some background, the California Central Valley was once a vast, highly productive system of wetlands, floodplains, and sprawling riparian forests. And these systems supported large populations of waterfowl, salmon, beavers, and elk, and were stewarded by indigenous groups for millennia. Importantly, these abundant aquatic sources contributed to the accumulation of groundwater in aquifers below the surface, which provided benefits to both humans and to the environment. However, from the late 1800s and into the better part of the 1900s, colonists began capturing rivers via concrete dams and levees and tapped groundwater aquifers in order to reclaim that water for California's growing agriculture, industries, and cities. Consequently, the Central Valley region has lost about 95% of its historic wetlands, and it's estimated that up to 90% of reproduction habitat for native salmon has been blocked due to concrete barriers such as dams, often resulting in them needing to be trucked over those dams to reach their regular spawning or reproduction habitat. Additionally, excessive groundwater pumping, exacerbated, of course, by climate change and drought, has depleted stream flows and has ultimately caused disconnection from important nutrient and temperature exchanges, which occur across this hyperrheic zone, where groundwater sources and surface water like a river or stream meet. And this is a significant issue because California's rich biodiversity and $49 billion agricultural economy depend heavily on sufficient and safe groundwater supplies. The good news is that my project alleviates all of these issues. Now, fortunately, the state has recognized the urgent need to better manage our groundwater and surface water resources and passed the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act back in 2015. And while this legislation does not require agencies to restore or improve conditions for listed species, it does require agencies to identify and consider impacts to groundwater-dependent ecosystems. And here, groundwater-dependent ecosystems include rivers, streams, and wetlands, which are connected at least seasonally to the groundwater below. And under this legislation, some groundwater agencies are collaborating to implement projects that meet multiple needs, including irrigation for agricultural lands, supplying drinking water to millions of Californians, and meeting in-stream flow requirements that support ecosystem function. And my project really identifies and highlights those efforts using salmon and trout species as indicators for ecosystem health. In order to achieve this, I first identified and mapped where critical habitat occurs within groundwater plan boundaries. So SIGMA, the legislation I mentioned, lays out regulations for groundwater agencies to submit plans outlining their strategies for reaching sustainable use of groundwater by 2040. In this study, I found that 28 plans along the Central Valley host critical habitats for Chinook salmon and steelhead trout. However, beyond co-occurrence, I wanted to analyze how well these plans either identified, considered, and/or supported groundwater-dependent ecosystems through their management strategies. To determine this, I, alongside my partners at the Nature Conservancy, developed a rigorous yet user-friendly framework for evaluating plans with respect to how well they addressed groundwater use impacts on these ecosystems. For example, plans received a rating of 0 if they did not make any mention of salmon as a species occurring or existing in their groundwater basin. A plan could receive a rating of 1 for citing the existence of either Chinook salmon or steelhead trout in their plan, and they received a rating of 2 for identifying the species as existing and mapping their habitat, where their habitat connects to the groundwater below the surface. Importantly, this framework could be developed and adopted by the Department of Water Resources, which is the ultimate authority on either accepting or rejecting these groundwater plans. And agencies are required to submit updates to plans on a 5-year basis. So there is some potential to use this framework to indicate if these plans are being implemented properly or not. And while most plans did not consider or support dependent species like Chinook salmon, over 75% of the plans analyzed did identify these species as existing in their basin. However, none of these plans achieved a total scoring of 5 or 6. And I kind of wanted to dig a little further and gain more insight regarding the challenges and some of the enabling conditions for agencies to really address the impacts of their groundwater use on dependent ecosystems. Therefore, I conducted 8 semi-structured interviews with groundwater agency leads, their consultants who are ultimately responsible for developing the groundwater plans, and landowners who took part in the development of the plans as well, and had that, on the ground local knowledge to provide to these agencies. Some of the key challenges that emerged from these interviews were closely related in theme and include severe gaps in data sets, the proper spatial and temporal scales for data sets that do exist regarding the status of local and regional groundwater storages. And generally, agencies cited lack of access to resources in order to really address these impacts of their uses on ecosystems. So a lot of these agencies are incredibly small, and they are tasked with meeting several different compliance issues, and some of the time not having that time or manpower behind the plan has been difficult. Some of the recommendations that emerged from these interviews are perhaps unsurprising. As Olivia mentioned in her talk, and as you'll see throughout as a theme throughout, intentional and consistent engagement with interested parties is really essential to implementing projects. Having that buy-in from local community members and really leveraging the strengths of that local knowledge set cannot be overstated. Second, groundwater agencies whose plans generally addressed impacts to ecosystems really leaned on the diverse strengths of their multidisciplinary teams and allowed for a deeper understanding of groundwater and surface water interactions, and those interactions, how they'll impact ecosystems. And last, some agencies are striving to achieve sustainable groundwater use from a holistic watershed approach. And this really recognizes not only the paramount connection between certain surface water bodies like rivers and streams and the groundwater beneath, but also really stresses the connection between watersheds. So sometimes you'll hear people are managing from summit to sea, and that is basically saying that you are considering all of the different aspects that go into the water cycle from, snowmelt and rain hitting the tops of mountains all the way to the rivers and out into the ocean environment. So I would like to highlight some of the projects and management actions that do achieve multiple benefits. The Solano Rainfall Recharge Project meets two simultaneous goals. One, recharging local groundwater supplies using available surface water and runoff from rain. And two, creating temporary habitat for migratory bird species along the Pacific Flyway. Several of these projects involve collaboration between agricultural water users, groundwater agencies, and conservation entities to recharge groundwater supplies and ultimately mimic floodplain habitat where zooplankton and other small aquatic insects provide a really strong base to the food web, which result in these larger salmon species that can better survive conditions in rivers and deltas, and ultimately provides multiple benefits. These efforts across adjacent groundwater agencies are providing positive insights for better managing groundwater, and such that they are adaptable to their changing conditions and ultimately increase the resilience of those groundwater dependent ecosystems. Lastly, and somewhat unexpectedly, I developed educational materials intended for groundwater agencies, their consultants, and conservation entities to really demonstrate salmon species dependence on those surface water, groundwater interactions throughout their several life stages. The written educational primer was featured in the spring edition of HydroVisions, which is the Groundwater Resources Association official magazine, and boasts over 2,500 subscribers who all operate in the land and water stewardship space. I also led a collaboration with two very talented science illustrators to create a 4-minute animation which discusses the importance of managing groundwater surface water interactions and their importance to Pacific salmon. And I'd actually like to share just a very brief clip from this video. Hopefully you can go to YouTube to watch the rest, but I'll play this quickly.
Several species depend on interactions between surface water and groundwater, like the Chinook salmon, which are protected under the Endangered Species Act. Salmon are born in freshwater and migrate to the ocean to grow and live as adults. After 1 to 3 years, the adults come back to the stream where they were born and reproduce. Here we see a female Chinook salmon digging her nest, or red, where she will lay her eggs. These eggs require a consistent source of oxygen in order to grow. Exchange between surface water and groundwater along the stream bed provides the proper nutrients and temperature to promote the growth and survival of the eggs.
So I really want to highlight and thank Bridget Bailey and Nicole Kitt, who are very talented artists. I highly recommend you go and check out some of their artwork. They went to California State University at Monterey Bay and studied science illustration there. They helped really bring this project to life, and it was a really important practice in science communication. And I think I can say that we all learned a lot. And I also want to thank Trevor Kumek, who will be presenting next. He graciously shared his musical talent and his very advanced studio for us to record the narration of this video. So thank you. So the key takeaways from my capstone experience are that if we can really identify and scale what have already been successful multi-benefit water solutions, then agencies will be better equipped to address groundwater use impacts on ecosystems, and ultimately the health of those groundwater ecosystems will improve. We know that we will likely not return to the lush riparian forests that were teeming with large land mammals and fish, but there are efforts that are striving to manage surface water and groundwater interactions to benefit ecosystems across the Central Valley. I am very excited to continue this interdisciplinary work as a water resources scientist and planner for Rincon Consultants. And of course, I would love to acknowledge my funders, Randy Repass and Sally Christine Rogers, who are advocates for salmon restoration and policy changes throughout California. I also want to thank Ann and Sarah, who have been great supporters for us, have been there every step of the way, academically, emotionally. I also want to thank Andrew Fisher, who is my academic advisor and groundwater expert, who has been extremely encouraging throughout this entire process, especially when the project called for some pivots that were unforeseen. So thank you very much. And last, Melissa Rohde and Julie Zimmerman, who were my two primary mentors at the Nature Conservancy, which was my partner entity throughout this capstone work. Of course, I want to thank my CSP family for the emotional and mental support throughout this 2 years. It's been a real honor to be part of such a talented and fun group. And I'm really looking forward to seeing everyone this weekend as we celebrate our graduation. So thank you all. I have my email here if you think of questions after, but I'm happy to take any of those now.